Hear Hardy and Michael Ford are coming. Ellen Wilkinson, the red flag, she is humming. We get around not as much as Dominic Cummings, even though he's driving blind. We are the Labour grassroots, where like-minded folk dwell. From countryside to city, it's warm and it's witty. The antidote to Pretty Patel. We are the Labour grassroots, time to raise a racket. The future is as bright as Crispin's red jacket. This is the space where we all go hell for leather, free from all the biased BBC blether. Like track and trace, we're better together, just as Carrie and Meg. Yeah, we got all the people from Inverness, Skegness, Barrow, Inverness, Chester, Leicester, Cirencester, Shrewsbury, Oswald Street, Swansea, Hernackley, Barnsley, Beccles, Nottingham and Eccles. We are the Labour grassroots, time to plant some grass. Where we've always had social distancing between us and the upper class.
Welcome to Labour Grassroots, where we have Happy New Year, first of all. Happy New Year to everyone. And we've got a really busy show today because we heard yesterday that the government was doing a U-turn and schools were not going to be open. It's taken quite a long time for that to come through, but it looks like the NEU did it. The question I'd like to know is, did the NEU bring about a U-turn? Did unions actually manage to stop the government continuing this crazy policy? And I'm going to ask Louise Regan from the NEU if that is the case. Louise, did you win a U-turn?
Yeah, well, I think we definitely did, Crispin. I just want to take a bit of an issue with your opening statement, which said schools are closed. Because I think we have to stop saying schools are closed. Schools have never been closed at any point through this pandemic. So schools are still open. Schools were open today, and we will continue to educate young people either in the setting for those from key workers or vulnerable groups, but also online, virtually for those children that are at home to protect our communities, because that is the position that it was and that it is now. But in terms of did we win? Well, Boris Johnson on Sunday said schools are safe. Schools are going on, schools are safe. And they allowed our schools to open on Monday. On Monday night, suddenly Boris Johnson says schools are vectors. Children and young people are vectors in schools. We have to shut down the schools and have fewer students there. Now, surely he didn't suddenly just go, oh, I think I've changed my mind. I think there was huge pressure from our members. And, what people need to know is that on Sunday morning, we held a Zoom call. We had 100,000 people on that Zoom call. For the whole of that briefing that we held on the Sunday morning. Throughout the briefing, throughout the whole time, there were 400,000 people that spent some time listening to what we were saying. And what we heard were people who were really anxious about the situation, not just for themselves, not just for children and young people. We know children and young people often don't get ill, but what we know is that if children and young people contract this new strain of the virus, which is 50 to 70% more more spreadable, that they will take it back into their homes and to their communities. We know our NHS is under massive pressure, and all of those things together made our members feel that they had to take some form of action, and our leadership led that. But our workplace reps, and we have spent a lot of time over this pandemic building and organising our members in our schools, in our workplaces, recruiting reps and making sure that they were ready. And I think that that just shows that when you are organised, when you are clear about what you are doing, our leadership have been very, very clear throughout this pandemic about what we were going to do at each stage. And we were looking at the science and we were very clear about it, that when you organise, when you build, that you can take effective action. And our members were absolutely behind the action that we took. They went into their workplaces, they explained why they were anxious about what was happening. And I think that combined effort made the government realise that schools weren't going to open. Lots of schools didn't open on the Monday anyway because of the work that we did. But how shameful that those schools that did open, those children and young people were put into that situation to immediately be told on Monday night, oh, sorry, no, we were wrong. You're now going to have to stop at home and work from home. And actually, I have to say, I think it's absolutely shameful to those school leaders that at 8 o'clock on a Monday night, there was an announcement telling them that they had to, from the following morning, go to remote learning. You know, it is an absolute shocking disgrace that this government treats our education workers in the way that it does.
Wow, and I can't believe when you say how many were on that Zoom call, it's almost as many as on these.
So we had 100,000 all of the time. 100,000 were either on the Zoom or watching on our other networks. But over the period of that briefing, 400,000 people engaged and joined in. What that tells you is that people understand that this government is failing us and know that by joining in with the collective unity of a trade union, they can, and they did, make a difference, because they made the difference. Our members are workplace reps who built and organised on the Sunday before schools were due to open on the Monday and made sure that we made our workplaces safer for our members, our children, our young people, but also our wider community. And not only that, we protect the NHS and other workers who are being attacked by this government.
Well, thank you very much for coming on, Louise. I might ask you to stay a bit later because we've got some questions from parents coming up. But I want to speak to James McCash, who is a teacher and a counsellor as well in London. James, are you there?
I think so.
Yeah, I can see you.
Yeah.
That's a good start. James, how on earth can a union mobilise that many people for a Zoom call and get so organised during this time? It's incredible.
Well, I mean, it is incredible. It feels quite strange, really, coming on here tonight after a year of catastrophe and disaster, with a feeling of not despair, but pride. Teachers and support staff, parents and students working together, we've managed to defy the government and force them to change direction and save countless lives and change the course of the pandemic. I think that, I think Louise put it really well when she said that on Sunday, Boris Johnson went onto the telly and he said that schools are safe. And then on Monday, he was saying they were so safe that they all had to close. And what happened in between? Well, we happened. That's what. The Sunday's meeting, that huge meeting, almost as big as the meeting that we're in right now, 100,000 people, the biggest in trade union history. It was incredibly exciting to be part of that. But I have to admit to you, Crispin, it wasn't the most exciting meeting I went to that day, because the most exciting meetings I went to over that weekend were the thousands of smaller meetings that happened with working people in schools across the country. These meetings happened below the radar. They didn't have any big names. They perhaps had a few dozen or perhaps even just a handful of members. And it's ordinary working people getting together, weighing up the facts and acting in the interests, not just of their own safety, but of that of the wider community. And that is the meeting that gives me great pride and great inspiration. And those people took personal risks. People put in letters to their head teachers saying that they refused to go to work because it wasn't safe for them and it wasn't safe for the people around them. And that was what forced the government to U-turn. The difference between Sunday and Monday, it wasn't the science changed, it wasn't the virus changed, but the reality did change. Because when Johnson said that schools would close, it was less a statement of intention and more a statement of fact. We were already closing them by workers taking action and parents voting with their feet. But I do want to kind of flag up that this isn't a victory. Frankly, we don't want schools to be closed. We want them to be safe. And it is a tragedy that we're at this position. And it's a tragedy that is entirely the fault of this reckless government. Because the NEU has spent months calling on the government to invest in school safety, and it's fallen on deaf ears. We need laptops and broadbands for all kids who need it. We need more space and more staff to allow social distancing in schools. And we need investment in our buildings for better safety and better ventilation. But we can't win those things on our own. We need everyone's support. And when workers used that Section 44 letter, they needed two things. They needed wisdom and they needed courage. They needed wisdom to know the right thing to do and courage to be willing to do it. And I think we have got so much more to fight for. And I know that people here are going to join us in fighting for it, because people in the Labour Party, well, most people in the Labour Party at least, are full of wisdom and courage.
Oh, thank you, James. I might bring you on later as well if we've got some questions from parents. Jackie Schneider is in South London. Are you there, Jackie?
I'm here.
So how did you feel on Monday? Did you go into school or?
I teach in a primary school, which actually is in a tier 4 area in London. So we were already being closed. So I spent my Sunday night though talking to colleagues in outer boroughs who who wouldn't. And it was fantastic. We were. And it's shameful. I mean, I think, as James said, we want the schools open, but we want them open safely. And I cannot believe it is controversial to say, do not send people to an unsafe workplace and do not threaten the community around us by transmitting the virus. It is shocking beyond belief. And the fact that the opposition were not shouting that from the rooftops, it caused me huge distress, and all credit for the NEU for having the moral high ground over this. And although that was fantastic, we are now faced with a growing problem because this government will not pay people to stay home, because there are families in the most terrible poverty who face losing their homes if they don't work. We are now seeing rising numbers of kids going back to school because they are being put in a position of being vulnerable. And and we've got to keep going on this, because what we can't do is allow the movement to split so that teachers then blame parents for sending kids in, but actually parents have got no choice because actually they have no way of earning enough money. So I think we have to address it as a movement. The government will want to play us off one against the other. They've deliberately allowed the key worker and the vulnerable children descriptions to be very, very wide. And I don't want to see a single child be left vulnerable at home. But the answer isn't to make the schools spread it even thinner. The answer is to not let people starve, to not tolerate people being in the most appalling poverty. And we have to say it loud and proud over and over. I don't want a single child in my school to be hungry, but I have to tell the truth. We cannot give those children breakfast and lunch and dinner, which is what a responsible government should do. The first duty of this government is to keep the people safe, and they are not doing it, and they are not being challenged to do it. So to keep the numbers down in school, not because I want to shut school, but because we have 3 pieces of incredible data from the medics, from SAGE, from Independent SAGE, from Imperial College, from the Tropical School of Hygiene. We need to keep the numbers down in school to stop our going over 1, or more people will die. I mean, it couldn't be any starker. And for that to happen, we have to support parents who cannot afford to not work. And we have to tell the government that. And yes, open the schools as safely as we can, but we don't do anyone but any favours by not telling uncomfortable truths.
Right. So you're actually saying that it's not that the government's not they've closed the schools in inverted commas, but lots of people are going to send their children in who regard themselves as vulnerable, and therefore there's a risk of the infection rate going up just because of that, and that wasn't what was happening before.
In March, I had tiny numbers coming into school. The furlough scheme seemed to be better, and we had small numbers of children coming in. But I am talking to colleagues today who had 20 plus children in a room. Now, if the numbers are, it might well be in some areas there are more vulnerable children, or schools near hospitals may well have more health worker children in, but we cannot just leave it randomly. We know the transmission rates will go up if schools are operating, at half capacity. I don't know what the numbers are, and the NEU, I am absolutely confident, will be taking this information back up from their reps, because that's why you need a trade union. It's got to be two-way. The trade unions have to give leadership, but they do that on the basis of the information they are getting from the thousands and thousands of members on the floor. And that's why I am so proud of the NEU and so disappointed in other unions that actually didn't take the moral high ground, who didn't back us up on that day.
Right. Okay, look, I'm going to move. Thank you, Jackie. I might bring you in later as well. I'm going to move to Sussex, to Phil Clark, who is a teacher in East Sussex and is an NEU branch secretary as well. So, Phil, what do you think about what Jackie was saying about the possibility that the numbers might not be as low in school, that the more vulnerable children will be coming in, and the infection rate might go up?
Without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, that's what we're dealing with now. I think we've got to recognise the absolute truth of what has happened over the last few days, so now, to realise what position we're now in to try and make improvements going forward. The government announced the school closures or moving to key worker and vulnerable opening because they had lost control of the school system. My area where I organise and teach is called Lewis, Eastbourne and Wealdon. It's not exactly Red Petrograd, and yet by Monday we had every school in Lewis, in defiance of the government move to key worker and vulnerable opening. We had every school in Peacehaven, in Seaford, 3/4 of the school in Eastbourne. Now, that's not traditionally strong areas for the trade union movement. The government had lost control. That's down to our reps. Now it will be down to our reps to take on the challenge that you're saying, that we are seeing more and more schools saying they're only open for key worker and vulnerable students, but actually they're really full. And we need to push back on that. And Jackie is absolutely spot on. We can push back on that as a trade union and make sure that head teachers are doing their job in limiting numbers, but also a lot of parents, they're scared about their income. They're scared about paying the rent. They're scared about putting food on the table. And therefore they feel they need to go to work, even though it's not really a vital industry, because the government isn't supporting them. So we've got to, I think, take what we have managed to do over what seems like, frankly, a year. And I feel like I've worked for a year since the 1st of January. We've got to take that enormous strength and pride that our members and representatives feel at having done so much so quickly, and turn that to all of the things now to make sure that we're doing the best for the kids. And I mean doing the best for the kids, I mean not just doing the best for them in terms of our day-to-day jobs in providing remote learning if that's what they're receiving, or safe and secure environment in school if they have to be in school, but also turning that against the government, so we can use that strength to win what our kids deserve, which is nothing more than safety at school and the best education that can be delivered in these sorts of circumstances.
So it's sort of like next stage is to work on the remote learning and get support from the government to make that effective. Yeah,
it's an ongoing battle. We have been let down at every possible opportunity. Today I've found out that my exam classes aren't going to have their exams. Now, that's no surprise. Everyone can see that coming. And yet there has been zero work done with the profession So now I can explain to them how it's going to work. Zero work done with the government and profession. So now my students are very worried. I can't reassure them as much as I'd want to because I don't know what this is going to look like. We've had months to prepare this, and the government has done nothing.
Right. All right. Well, I'm going to move on because there's a couple of people who need to speak before a certain time. But thank you for coming on, Phil. I might ask you to speak later if you're around. I'm going to bring in Janine, who is in Dorset and is a representative of Unison. It's not just the NEU that was calling for schools to be closed. Janine, are you there?
Yes, I am, Crispin. And thank you for inviting me. And it's always a pleasure to speak after my NEU colleagues and Louise as well. So, hello, Louise. I think, I endorse everything that my NEU colleagues have said around the school closure. And likewise, I am so proud of the members of Unison in schools, the school support staff who, again, extremely bravely have been sending in their Section 44 letters, have been threatened with loss of pay, have been threatened with having to take a day's so-called leave, which of course they don't have, on Monday. And this is all about trade union organisation from the ground up. So I'd just like to put out there to any Unison members who are in this call. One thing that we haven't spoken about is early years, and I know that was spoken about in Parliament today. And early years, of course, is still open. So the government have chosen to, unlike lockdown 1, have chosen to keep early years open. And really, it is a political decision. It's not a scientific one. So I've seen we have just sent out a message to our members tonight, which is just hot off the press. And I've just seen that that Callum Semple, who's a professor of child health and a member of SAGE, has said himself that keeping early years settings open is a political decision. Matt Hancock in Parliament yesterday said that that they're keeping them open because they're private businesses, and if they don't keep them open, they will fail. So the government is putting private profit before public health. It is making public health decisions based on private profit. Somebody just mentioned in the chat there about Rebecca Long Bailey, and she said this is the same in Parliament today, that they need to be treated the same as schools. So there is no scientific evidence that they're not a vector for transmission. And any mixing of families and any mixing of groups has got to be dangerous in these particular circumstances, and bringing infections back into the home and back into vulnerable people. So Unison is calling for them to be closed, except for key workers and vulnerable children, obviously. Again, we don't want to close schools. We don't want to get children out of education. We don't want to take children out of childcare, but we do want families that are alive, and we want people in the community to live through this pandemic. We don't want to see any more deaths and any more unnecessary deaths simply because of trying to keep people, businesses, not people, businesses in profit. And I think that's something that's driving absolutely what Jackie was saying about the numbers in schools. That's absolutely what we're hearing on the ground today, is the numbers in schools are significantly higher than they were in the first lockdown. I had to take my own counsel to task today, who told me that it was because parents were confident in sending their children to school. Absolutely not. That is not why there are more children in school. It's because more businesses are open, more people are classified as key workers, more businesses are open because they want to maintain their profits. And as Jackie and others have said, people are terrified about not going to work and not being able to put food on the table. And that's why there's more children in school, and that's why the R8 won't come down.
Right. Well, thank you, Janine. It's good to see Unison and NEU solidarity to both, with both. So I get the wrong title. It's not a noun. I don't know what it is. Solidarity. But anyway, thank you, Janine. I'm going to bring in Alistair, who's a parent and he has to go at 8 o'clock because he's got childcare duties. I know exactly where you're coming from, Alistair. You right there?
Good evening, and thank you very much, Crispin, for inviting me to the meeting.
Can I just ask you? You're in a group called Parents for Safe Return. So you've been campaigning for safety in schools yourself. So
yeah, our group was set up back in May in the last lockdown, when we were concerned about the government's proposal to return to schools on the 1st of June, and as we all know, that didn't happen in the way that the government wanted it to. It was partly because we had some extraordinary meetings around the country of parents expressing their concerns, and we are more or less in the same situation. Obviously, we're not at the point yet of discussing return because the government is in free fall, having had to roll back its complete lie about schools being safe. And to be honest, I think the important point here that I want to make is that Boris Johnson tells a lie, and the lie is this: that schools are a national priority. He keeps repeating this lie. He tells a big lie and tells it often, actually, and it's just simply not true that schools are his national priority. I can demonstrate that very easily by looking at the funding for education in the last decade. This Tory government and successive Tory governments have underfunded education for a decade. But look at what happened over free school meals. It took a Premier League footballer, to force the government to give children food over the holidays. So this lie that education is their national priority is out there, and one of the things that we have to do, and one of the things that we're trying to explaining to parents, is this is not the case at all. We can see all of it, as well as how it connected with the Black Lives Matter struggles in the summer as well. So we're still really concerned about the situation in schools, and I completely agree with the point that Jackie Schneider made about what I'm expecting to happen, because this government's vicious. And there are the Tory media, and there are also parents' organisations. There's a notorious one called Us for Them, which is really a Tory AstroTurf outfit, who have engaged in a war against the NEU and are trying to persuade parents that the only problem with schools is that teachers are lazy. So although the government are in free fall right now, they will regroup. And they will come back and they will attack the NEU, they will attack Unison, and they will play divide and rule. And our parents group is really about trying to say to parents, look, we need to unite with the staff in schools so that they can't divide us. If they divide us, they'll start forcing children back to school too early. So Parents for a Safe Return, when we're at the position of a safe return, we know we're a long way from that. Could be after half term, it could be after Easter. We don't know yet, but what we're looking to do is to work with everybody to encourage parents to listen carefully to staff, listen to the science, and not to send their children back into schools that are unsafe. So we have an organising team, and we've got a meeting tomorrow. If people want to come along, they can. I'll drop the Twitter feed and the details in the chat in a moment before I leave. But unfortunately, I've got to go and do duties. So thanks ever so much for having me. If you've got any quick questions, I can stay for a minute or two, but otherwise I'll be off.
Well, no, thank you very much. Do you want to put in the chat if you can put the link to your to the organisation so people can follow that. Lovely. Thank you very much, Alistair. Good luck tonight.
Pleasure.
Easy session. And I will now. I'm going to speak to Joanne in Dorset, who's a parent, a governor, and a teacher.
Hiya, Crispin. Thanks for letting me speak for a short while. Firstly, I just wanted to say, as a school governor and as a mum of three, a massive thank you to all the groups that have put pressure on the government to move schools to mostly learning online. That's obviously the unions, thank you very much, but also MPs such as Rebecca Long-Bailey, Zara Sultana, Claudia Webb and Apsana. And then councils like Brighton, Liverpool and Southampton, who basically said to parents on Monday morning, if you send kids in, we're not going to name you. So that was a real big help to a lot of parents. And then as already mentioned, a massive thank you to all the teachers who were brave enough, and support staff who were brave enough to put their heads above the parapet and submit a Section 44 letter to their head, because I know that was no small thing. I don't think people realise so much depends on which head you've got. Some heads are such great, wonderful people, like the school I work for, but there were stories of people being named and shamed on Monday, and I hope those heads felt stupid at 8 p.m. on Monday evening. And I found myself punching in the air for the first time in quite a long while at the NEU meeting on Sunday. It was so well attended, fantastically well organised, and then within 24 hours, of course, it was highly effective. So now we have the public's attention, and I feel we need to keep pushing. Right now, I think there are 3 key problems we need to focus on that have already been alluded to. Firstly, the digital divide. We'll know that back in June, the DFE promised 200,000 laptops. It delivered 100,000. And nearly all of the funding for that project, which was £96 million, went to a company called Computer Centre. And it won't be a surprise for many of you listening to hear that its founder, Peter Hume, his wife is a Tory party donor and gave Boris Johnson £100,000 for the last election. So there you go. And then there's the related problem that many households don't have enough bandwidth. And as a minimum, I feel we should be demanding, the government should be demanding, that broadband providers offer free service upgrades to families with children who are pupil premium. And by pupil premium, for anybody not knowing what that means, children who receive free school meals, basically. Secondly, already mentioned, but as a matter of urgency, I feel we need to offer some support to sectors who seem to have fallen through the net yet again. Johnson declared that any student with an EHCP plan, or what was known as a special needs statement, are considered vulnerable and are therefore, as a matter of course, meant to attend school. Of course, there are lots of cases where a parent isn't able to educate their child at home because they don't have the stuff they need, there isn't enough space. But we can't make that a blanket provision, because it's left us with a lot of special schools that are effectively fully attended still, and no safer this week than before. So I really feel that teachers and parents, rather than being dictated to centrally, should be allowed to discuss this between each other and assess each case individually. And the exercise discretion. So I feel we need to support calls to do that. And thirdly, as already mentioned, early years providers have been thrown under a bus yet again. They said themselves, we can't close because it's private provision and they'd go out of business. And as Janine mentioned, how can that possibly be the priority? And I read earlier about an early years manager today who was literally tearing her hair out. She just said she felt like closing the whole business, because she'd received a letter from the Department for Education saying that her funding would now be determined term by term on attendance. So she has to choose between safety and keeping her business running. Wow. And that's the letter she got today. So that's really supportive. And then, as well as those 3 actions, very quickly, I think we need to plan ahead, because pressure's already building again to return to full attendance, and we need to kind of get ahead of public opinion. So primarily, I would love us to push for vaccinations for teachers and support staff. I don't know how they, obviously in consultation with those professionals, because some of them may not want that. But before we send them back into crowded classrooms without PPE, we do need to push for that. And we also need councils, schools and parents able to use their discretion whether or not to send their children back to classrooms based on their personal circumstances. Because at the moment, even if you've got somebody clinically vulnerable at home, you still have to attend school. I'm not going to say any names because I don't have permission to tell this story, but I knew somebody who had a son with very difficult breathing problems at home and just had a very serious operation. And their school, the head was exercising no discretion and said the younger boy still had to attend or else the mother would be fined. We have to give that power to councils and parents and schools to exercise discretion on individual case bases. And just the last thing, I wish we could reduce class sizes for returning to school by using blended learning. You know, you could have exam classes in most of the time, but other students in on a 3-day, perhaps preparing for work at home, coming in, we call it flipped learning. And again, that should be up to the discretion of schools and parents. And last but by no means least, we need mass testing of students and staff to be conducted regularly. There's no point 1 week, once a fortnight. It needs to be at least twice a week to be effective, and it needs to be done by trained professionals. These port and down assessment of lateral flow test kits have been found to be 50 to 70% effective. And guess when they're 70% effective? When they're conducted by professionals, not by children. Our daughter was a part of a public health test just before Christmas, and she'll tell you it hurts. If you do it properly, it hurts. And hers was conducted by a nurse, so it was fine. But she said if she was having to do that herself, she's not so sure. She'd be pushing it in quite so far.
Right.
So, yeah, that's all I've got to say. But again, a massive thank you for everybody who's campaigned for teachers. It just feels wonderful. Yay. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. And lots of points are raised there. And I'm going to bring in our first MP for the night. Zara Sultana, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much, Crispin. Thank you, everyone. I'm Zara Sultana. I'm the Labour Member of Parliament for Coventry South. Sorry, were you saying something?
I just said, I know you have to go
Yes.
soon, but from what you've heard, this was a great victory for common sense and for teachers. What do you think the next stage has to be on this?
Of course, firstly, I just want to give my solidarity to everyone on the call, to parents, to teachers and to students. This government has treated us all with contempt, but especially those who are in the education profession. They've been grossly mistreated. And like was mentioned by many speakers before me, the government didn't suddenly see science change. They didn't see the light overnight. This was sustained pressure that was coming from the NEU, from Unison, from rank and file members. And it was that pressure that resulted in that U-turn. So my hats off to all the organisation that caused this. And personally, it has been so inspiring to see. We have seen this government having to make U-turns consistently over the past year, and that's because of communities, workplaces, and the grassroots making that happen. We know that this government has lost control of managing the spread of the virus, its capacity to govern us, and we don't even trust the government to really be following scientific advice when they're told to by SAGE. And that's why it's incumbent on us all to remind them that it is public safety, not private profit, that has to be the #1 priority. In Parliament, I've seen this government consistently try to use economic arguments to justify reckless decisions, but we can rebuild the economy. We could provide resources and time to help students who might fall back in their education, but we can't bring people back from the dead. And that is what is a key point that needs to be made. Also, for me, it's really interesting to see the Tories pretend that they really care about the education of working class kids, when we know that it is educators who devote their lives and also their personal lives, because they spend more hours outside of the classroom working than any other profession. It is those people, it is teachers and teaching staff who really care about the education of their students. And also, Eton College closed their doors before Christmas, while we saw this government issue letters threatening legal action against schools who wanted to do the same, state schools. So that's why I and several other MPs, including Claudia, who is on this call, have reiterated time and time again that schools should only reopen when we are confident that they are safe for children, teaching staff and the wider community. So I'm really proud to support the NEU's campaign to make schools safe. And it has been mentioned before, so I'm just going to reiterate and sound like a repetition. But while we have moved in the right direction when it comes to schools, we need to make sure that every child has a laptop, every child has internet access, and we also need to be calling for nurseries and preschools to be closed except for vulnerable children and those children of key workers. The government talks again about private profit being the reason why preschools and nurseries aren't closing, but they need to announce funding for providers to weather the storm and give parents proper financial support. And I just want to touch on universities as well, because my constituency is home to Coventry University and Warwick University. And the truth is, many universities were in crisis mode before the pandemic even hit, and that's due to the damaging effects of decades of marketisation. We've seen precarious staff in universities have their pay and conditions slashed. Many have lost their jobs already. BAME staff, of course, suffer disproportionately, and all staff have seen attacks on pensions and conditions, from the audit culture to the artificially induced competition, the unsustainable funding model, and huge debts that universities have stacked up to finance vanity building projects. Higher education is another sector that doesn't work. It doesn't work for staff, it doesn't work for students, and it doesn't work for society. So on the left, collectively, we need to be calling for a jobs guarantee for all staff in higher education, in particularly the most vulnerable and insecure, the scrapping of tuition fees and the abolition of student debt, rent cancellation and reduction, caps on the salaries of senior managers, and the democratization of university decision making, as well as the cancellation of the research excellence framework, the teaching excellence framework, and the National Student Survey. And finally, another quick point just about exams. I think this crisis has shown us how the way we have developed our education system, it's really not fit for purpose. Children in the UK are already some of the most tested in the world. And every crisis, of course, presents an opportunity to change things. And it's about time we moved away from such an exam-heavy education system and prioritized the creativity, the critical thinking, and the well-being of students, and a much more flexible, diverse curriculum. Again, something else that we should be calling for in this moment, because this pandemic has forced us to rethink things that we might have taken for granted, as well as highlighting and exacerbating the underlying crises across society, and that's in healthcare, housing, the social care system, as well as education. And finally, I'll just end by saying this, that if this government does really care about the inequalities in education, I don't believe that it does, but let's just give them, the benefit of doubt. It should address them at the very root. So that's addressing the attainment gaps, the inequalities entrenched by private schools and grammar schools, and fully fund every single school that all children get the best possible education. I will continue to stand on the side of teachers and teaching unions, because let us never forget, and let us remind every single politician too, that unions are the beating heart of the labour movement. So in Parliament, I will continue to fight for you, with you, alongside you, so we build back better for schools, for children, and for wider society. Thank you.
Well, that was really good time. You did that in good time. But the other thing is, I've been feeling a little bit despondent about Labour's response to the NEU, and it's good to see you in Parliament backing the NEU, and solidarity with you and all you're doing. Thank you for coming on the call. And I am going to speak to Helen, who has a question. Oh, Helen. Are you there? Are you there? Oh, hold on. Too many people in this room. I can't find her now. Helen Wood. Are you there, Helen?
Can
you hear me, Helen?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah. You had a question that you wanted to be addressed about SEN children.
Yeah, so my name's Helen Wood. I'm a Unison member. I'm also working in the area of disabled children, and I'm also the Vice Chair of the Labour Party Social Work Group. I want to say how energising and impressive the speakers have been, and the effort and the collective effort have been of everybody to make voices heard. I think that's the thing, I do feel the lack of that around the social work profession, actually, definitely in the wider political system, but also in the Labour Party sometimes. I want to talk a bit about what an EHCP plan is. So disability is an area that, unless you have worked around it, a lot of people don't know much about it. Some people in the teaching profession don't know much about it. Most of our politicians in government in the Conservative Party, I find, don't know much about it, and quite a lot of people in the Labour Party don't either. So the children who have EHCP plans have a coordinated plan, which involves a lot of different professionals, and the schools pull this together. And they are educated in
Sorry, can you tell what EHCP stands for?
Education and Healthcare Plan.
Education, right, okay.
Yeah, so disabled children who are either in mainstream school with one of these plans or in a special school have a very comprehensive plan which the schools pull together along with social work sometimes, and all their needs are looked at under that plan, and it is coordinated within the school. It's based within the school environment. Now, people who are talking about vulnerable children being in school are also including disabled children in that. And what I wanted to say about that is that for some disabled children, they can manage okay at home and their families can manage with them. Some children are so challenged and their families are so challenged that the EHCP plan that they have alongside the school is also part of their care. The school gives care as well as education. And it's a very important thing to get across. The children are entitled to this. It's not just something that can stop for some of those children. It's a huge adjustment to get them into the school routine. They depend on it, and their behaviours sometimes are delineated by being within that structure and being within that routine. So my question really is what framework has been put around this? Because I can tell you, this is an impressive group of people to talk to. It's also quite an intimidating group of people to talk to. If you were trying to say something that they didn't want to hear, and if a parent is saying, actually, I really feel my child's needs are best served within a school environment, you know, it might be difficult for parents to get that across. And some children, I think, may be being risk assessed out of school, specifically because of the special needs, which mean that they would be better served within a school environment. I think their needs are in direct conflict with the needs of teachers sometimes, and it's worth looking at that conflict directly rather than avoiding it, you know.
Can I just ask Jackie Schneider, are you okay to answer, make this point, Jackie?
Yeah, I mean, I might not be the best qualified in the room, so honestly, if any of my colleagues want to jump in on top of me, but what I would say is that the whole point of keeping schools open for key worker and vulnerable children is precisely so that we can actually manage that and make a safe environment. The problem we've got is that schools, and not all schools are created equal, and all the problems we had before lockdown are exacerbated during the lockdown. So if you're in a school that is fantastically inclusive, then actually there's not so many problems, because that lockdown can be managed by having a proper plan for a child with one of those plans to be deemed vulnerable, and we can do that in school. However, if you are in a school that cares more about its results than it cares about the needs of its children, then they will use that as an opportunity to risk assess you, not just out the building, you know, out of the borough if they actually could. And so we have to fight that. Now, we could, if we had a national education service, or if we'd had a government that would even listen to the NEU, we could take over all the faith group spaces, every church that's not used, every library that's being shut, and set up discrete units where we actually met the needs of children who can't socially distance or who have different medical needs. So it's not that we can't do it. This government is choosing not to do it. And if you're at a school that isn't inclusive, then actually they need to be reminded they have a legal obligation. Every single child with special education needs is considered vulnerable, and it shouldn't be down to the parent to have to fight it. But sadly, it's down to parents to fight for everything if you have a disabled child. And NEU will stand shoulder to shoulder with parents who are being denied access to those ECH plans, and we can make those schools offer it. And again, it's not impossible to make it COVID safe. We could do it. We can't do it when every single child's in school, but when we have to prioritise, then we can do that, and we could make that happen. And you know, I send huge solidarity to parents who have to fight. It's not the illness or the condition that's the disability. It is the way our education system stands. So I really stand in solidarity with you, and you know, I'm sure NEC members will, sorry, NEU members will help any parent and you know, and talk to us, because we need to make sure that disabled children are not trampled over by this government.
Thanks, Jackie. I think I might bring in Janine, who I just noticed made some comments in the chat. Are you there, Janine?
Yeah, I am, Crispin.
So what I'm interested about this is the government's failure to look after vulnerable children is being exposed by the closure of schools. Is that really what we're going to see now?
I think it absolutely is, actually. I mean, I think parents, I think it needs to be remembered that these children have an entitlement to education. They absolutely need, have that right to have the education that suits their needs. And my experience in Dorset is actually that there are a number of academies, and I won't quote them on here, but there are a number of academies who have a policy of off-rolling children that don't meet the criteria that will help them improve their league table scores. And these children are just abandoned. So, for example, I know a parent whose child has been unable to find a place in school for over 2 years. And these the government is abandoning this group of people because, quite frankly, they don't believe they're of any value to society, so there's no value educating them. And it is frankly quite disgusting. What we're saying in Unison is that we want every parent who has a child with an EHCP to be able to choose whether they're sending their child into school or not. So there will be a place for them when the schools are partially opened, but it's not for the school to say they should or shouldn't be there. It's for the parent to make that choice as to whether they feel their child is safer in the school environment or safer at home.
Right. Well, thank you, Janine. I've also just Emma's put her hand up in the chat. Are you there, Emma? So I've muted you by mistake. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. I'm Emma Skinner, chair of Leicester West CLP. I have 2 children who are SEN, one of whom who does have an EHCP plan. He is ASD. And I am concerned about the idea of having social workers come into home to decide whether your child is vulnerable enough to force them into school. My son is actually doing really, really well at home, and he would not be able to work in the current environment within school. It's too different. It's not the school that he's used to. And with ASD children, patterns of behavior and everything being as it should be is extremely important. So my children are not in school. I have 3 biological children, 5 stepchildren. I have 5 at home, which I am educating. It's not easy, but it is the right thing to do. Sometimes we understand that teachers have a duty. They feel that duty to educate our children, but they also have a duty to keep our children safe. And that is first and foremost the most important thing. So I completely support the NEU and everything that they've done, and every teacher that's sent in a section 44, because at the end of the day, your duty changed. Your duty changed to keep children safe. So thank you. But I just wanted to raise that point about social workers being involved in education and coming into homes, and therefore manipulating the situation there, because I don't think it's a very good idea. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Emma. And I'm going to speak to one of our regular contributors to the show, who is also the only child who is attending this soon. Are you there, Isaac?
Yeah, I'm here.
So how are you feeling about the closure of school, and how does it affect you? Because you're in a vulnerable, your class is a vulnerable group, aren't you?
Yeah, I am, and it's not like I really have to do the actual proper lessons on Microsoft Teams yet. I'm starting out on Monday, but I still have to do like all these projects, which is almost like homework, but still. But it's kind of stressful because a few weeks back we actually did practice doing this kind of situation at school on Microsoft Teams, so we had to come in a few hours later for it. But then there was actually one person who was tested positive for COVID in my year, and then a bunch of people in my class had to sell anyway. So I felt a lot more
your signal's really bad.
That's it's strange, but I don't know why it was saying about high CPU usage, but that's fine. The problem is the problem all about this is that the government. The problem is that the government and Boris and Starmer and everyone are paying too much money of our economy to recreational activities, not enough to healthcare, education, and housing, and important things like that. They're more focusing on pubs than there are on vaccines, and which is very bad for me, because tomorrow is my birthday and I'm going to be 14, meaning I might actually I'm the right age to actually join the Labour Party, but I don't know if I should. So because I'm actually kind of doubting it because of everything that's going on at the moment. So
Isaac,
yeah, pretty much.
Your camera's breaking up and your sound as well, but I think we got the gist of it. And you're spot on. You should join the Labour Party. We don't all have to support them. I'm going to move back to Helen, because Helen, you started this little conversation. Do you want to speak, Helen? Oh.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, just on the point of social workers deciding whether children attend school, if it's to do with a disability and solely a disability, I don't think that would be the role of the social worker. We might have the schools are supposed to consult with us, but mostly the schools are undertaking the risk assessments. I think sometimes social workers can be doing it. I'm not sure that that's a situation I've encountered. That's all I wanted to say about that, but no social worker would want to manipulate anything. The intention would be to help.
Well, thank you, Helen.
Okay.
Everyone seems to have a bad signal. I hope that the next person that we get on will have a really clear signal. So I'm guessing that she may. I will now bring in Claudia Webb, who's been listening patiently to everyone. And hopefully Claudia's got a good signal. Have you got a good signal, Claudia?
I hope so. I hope so.
I hear you very well and hear you well, so it's looking good. So what from what you've heard, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think about everything? It's quite a big subject. It's a massive subject.
Yeah, I mean, well, look, firstly, Crispin, let me just thank you for inviting me to speak. And it's an absolute pleasure, of course, to join such an inspiring range of educators, trade unionists and comrades really this evening. And of course, I stand in full solidarity with and support all trade unions who were demanding that all schools and colleges move immediately to online learning. And of course, the left must learn from the demonization of education unions in recent weeks and indeed throughout this pandemic. And at times it's been reminiscent of the brutal campaign against the miners' unions in the 1980s. Across the country, of course, the NEU, the National Education Union, and other teaching unions, Unison, Unite, and many others have consistently stood up for children and young working families. And that's been so inspiring to see. We already know, of course, that teachers are some of the most underpaid and undervalued members of our society. We must therefore resolve for them to receive a radically fairer offer of pay and working conditions, both during the rest of this pandemic and as we rebuild from it. So let us be clear, however, the attacks on the socialist movement are an attack on working people. They are designed to break our spirit and crush our resolve to fight for a fairer world. Yet we must oppose these divide and rule tactics, or divide and rule attempts, because when we stand together, there is nothing we cannot accomplish. And the National Education Union was able to exemplify that in true fashion. For weeks, I've been amongst those calling for education to be moved online and for a national lockdown to replace the failed tier system. Yet until until early this week, the government was continuing to ignore expert advice. That's why the collective action of the National Education Union, other teaching unions and other unions, parents and others, had to make their voice heard and force the government to change course. This was grassroots mobilization at its best. And our role as socialist members of parliament is to stand shoulder to shoulder with you. Our support must be unwavering. And in comments on Monday morning, mere hours before his latest U-turn, the Prime Minister said without evidence that schools are safe and that the risk to teachers is no greater than it is to anyone else. He failed to understand or even comprehend the reality. He failed to recognise that for communities like mine, here in Leicester East, he failed to recognise that, for example, 90,000 Pakistani and Indian grandparents live with their grandchildren. And unlike with previous lockdowns, this time the government, however, cannot waste the sacrifices of people across the UK. And so therefore, moving forward, we have to continue, and I will continue to campaign for all pupils, regardless of their backgrounds, to immediately receive the laptops that are necessary and the super fast broadband that they require to participate in online working. I was elected, as you will know, on a radical socialist manifesto that promised universal broadband, free at the point of use. Yet when champions like Rebecca Long-Bailey, John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn pushed this principle, this was derided across the mainstream media as broadband communism. And therefore, we've got to keep pushing back, and because this is where we are now. Everybody is talking about the need for universal broadband. The UK is way behind though. It's way behind in terms of the proportion of fibre in its total fixed broadband infrastructure. And as of September 2019, only 10% of the UK properties had access to full fibre connections. Organisations like the Good Things Foundation found that nearly 2 million households in the UK have been without internet access during lockdown, and that more than 10 million are dependent on pay-as-you-go internet access. There are also an estimated 80,000 premises in the UK that are located in so-called not-spot areas, i.e. those without mobile phone coverage, and that applies to areas like mine, where we've got the situation whereby children learning online, the need for everyone to access internet and appropriate equipment has never been more important than now. Failure to do so will only compound racial, class and regional inequality. So this is the biggest battle now on our hands, to make sure that everybody is leveled up in this way and push the government on its own rhetoric. So far, the government has failed to do this. And as socialists, we cannot allow this pandemic to continue to have such a disproportionate impact. The government's failure to invest so that we can adapt learning to the 21st century has meant that young, vulnerable and disadvantaged people have been left on the wrong side of the digital divide. We on the left must call for taxes, I believe, on digital monopolies and investment in connectivity so that everyone, especially vulnerable children, can have access essential digital services as a human right. And as we go forward, it is also vital that we pressure the government, and I'll be doing my bit, to pressure the government to use this period to establish measures to keep schools and colleges COVID secure, more COVID secure. I mean, the government should have opted for a zero COVID strategy. Many still laugh at us as socialists when we push a zero COVID strategy. A zero COVID strategy is a race equality strategy. It's an equalities strategy. It means everybody can remain safe. Germany, for example, invested 500 million in making schools ventilation proof. China brought plexi screens into classes. Italy carried out randomized testing of pupils. So we need proper mass testing, the vaccination of staff, starting with those at highest risk. Yet above all, we must ensure that teachers receive a fairer deal as we move forward. The crisis has shown that the people who really matter and who can keep our society ticking are not billionaires and the super rich, but it's actually teachers, it's nurses, it's carers, it's cleaners, it's checkout attendants, and many more essential frontline workers. This must be reflected with a significant restructuring of our economy along the lines of justice, with pay rises for those who we clearly cannot live without. Were it not for the National Education Union and teachers and parents, we would not be where we are today, more protected than we were yesterday, because teachers are an indispensable part of our society, of the labour movement and of future generations. So Crispin, I stand in solidarity with you all. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here with you. Thank you. Solidarity.
Thank you, Claudia. Great to hear you. And so much needs to be done, but we're on the way with that little victory on the U-turn. I think it's the start of the journey. And I'm going to bring in another regular on the show, which is Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Hello.
Hi, Rebecca. So you've been quite consistently following the NEU's advice. And a lot of, I have to say, people say they feel despondent about the Labour Party at the moment, but I felt more despondent about the Labour Party when I saw that U-turn on, was it Monday, where in the morning Labour's education policy was we've got to keep the schools open, and then just when it was found out that Boris Johnson was going to do a press conference, suddenly, no, we've got to close the schools. I felt like there was no principle going on with that. It's great that you've come on. I'm not going to put you in any political awkwardness. I'm just saying that's my feeling. And it's great to see you and other MPs who've stood with the NEU. What have you taken from what's happened in the last couple of days? And you know, do you think it gives us as a movement some strength that we can build on? And what sort of things do you think we should be focusing on next?
I think what the NEU and other unions have done, and campaigners as well, has been phenomenal. But we've got to remember that they felt like they've been on their own for nearly 9 months, and they've kept going and going and going and raising these concerns when quite a lot of the time they were the only voices doing that. And I wish I could feel jubilant about what happened with the U-turn, but I don't feel jubilant because I know that we shouldn't have been in that situation anyway, and thousands of people are going to die because the government hasn't dealt with this pandemic properly. There are 2 issues that go right to the heart of all of this, and people have picked up on this right from the start with Jackie Schneider's comments. There were 2 issues: the prioritisation of health versus the prioritisation of economic interests. And the government had a priority. It should have prioritised safety and ensured that all of the economic framework was put in place to make sure that people could isolate right from the very, very start. Now, we've had the worst pandemic management, I think, in the whole world in our response to this crisis. When you look at countries like New Zealand, for example, that adopted a zero COVID strategy from the start, they locked down early. They didn't come out of that lockdown until they knew they'd got the transmission rate right down, and then they returned to normal. And that's where we should have been on Monday. We should have been going back to school. Our children should have been learning. People should have felt secure and safe at work, but we weren't. We were in an absolutely shambolic situation because we went too late into the first lockdown because the government dilly-dallied between economic interests and safety. They weren't stringent enough when they imposed that first lockdown. There was confusion right across the economy about what constituted essential work. We had people going to building sites, factories, call centres, when the government should have been stringent. They should have categorised what an essential worker was, kept key utilities, the water industry, food, for example, and all of the support services and public services that we rely on, to keep them going. But everything else should have been shut down temporarily, and people supported economically to be able to do that, but it didn't happen. And then we had the second lockdown, which shouldn't have been required because we came too quickly out of the first one. And even in that second lockdown, the government wasn't serious. They could have closed schools then for a short period of time and broken the chain of transmission, but they refused to do it. And then we are where we are today. You had a government who, after 8 months of knowing that this was on the horizon, hadn't planned for the prospect of school closures. They hadn't looked at the proposals that have been put forward by the NEU for blended learning. They hadn't adopted any of the safety measures about getting extra school space, the creation of Nightingale schools, if you like, so you could actually space pupils out. They didn't look at rotas and making sure that you could have certain year groups in while other ones were off. None of this was addressed, and it should have been. And then there was the situation with exams as well, and the government today confirmed that they were finally going to cancel all A-levels and GCSEs. But we'd been asking for that since last year, so that teachers could plan, students knew what exactly it was they had to do to get the grades they needed. And now we're in a state of chaos where people aren't really sure what's going to be assessed and what isn't going to be assessed. They don't know whether the work that they've done, which wasn't meant to be assessed, is going to be assessed. And that will then put them at a detriment. So it's an absolute shambles, really. And the fact that on Monday, we were in a situation where, despite the amazing campaigning that had been going on with the NEU and other organisations across the country, we eventually had Jeremy Hunt, as the voice of the trade unions. I felt like we'd gone right through the wardrobe and into Narnia. That's how bizarre of a situation that we were in, and we can't let that happen again. So there's a number of things that have been picked up on, and I won't spend too much time talking through them all, but the campaign needs to continue now. And firstly, it needs to continue on safety. We heard, I think Janine mentioned the situation with nurseries. They're open in full. And the only argument that we've heard so far for not closing them is an economic one. Support the nurseries so that they can close. Financially support the nurseries and the nursery staff so that they can take that time off. And yes, open to key workers and vulnerable children to make sure that they're looked after. But for all other children, they should be at home with their parents. The second point is about the safety within those settings that are open to vulnerable and key worker children. The government hasn't updated its risk assessment guidance in light of the new variant, which is hugely more transmissible than the previous version, and they need to. They need to look at distancing within schools, even with the limited number of pupils that they've got. They need to look at PPE and masks as an effective way to stop transmission, and they need to look at vaccinating those frontline workers in those settings that are open, as well as the families and the children who are attending them. Give them priority along with the other vulnerable groups that are currently prioritised. The third point is on the digital divide that people have mentioned, and I was absolutely staggered to hear today that the definition of vulnerable children has been changed to include those who don't have access to a laptop. Now, if you go to constituencies around the country that have huge levels of deprivation, you'll find that A, a lot of the schools haven't received the laptops that they were supposed to receive, and B, in that scenario, you're going to see nearly whole classes back in school, which defeats the whole object of having this lockdown in the first place. So we need to make sure that every child has a learning device at home, and that should have been the case outside of a lockdown anyway. And the comments are made about broadband communism, and it was all laughed out of town when we had the general election, but how we all loved that we had a little bit of broadband communism now, I tell you. And then the last thing is about primary assessments. I should mention that because there's other barriers that are in the way of schools at the moment when they should be focusing on emotionally supporting pupils and supporting their education, and primary assessments need to be scrapped. They really aren't feasible in this period. And overall, we know we need to see a complete change to the whole school assessment system overall. So we have had a win, and it's fantastic that that's happened, but this is just the start of a very long campaign that doesn't just prioritise public safety, but looks at the whole economic framework that put us in this situation in the first place. So solidarity, everyone, and keep going.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, or Becky, as I like to call you, but I don't know if I'm allowed to because I'm not, Anyway, but I did want to go back to Louise because I like to round it off. And Louise, you were in the campaign that has seen this U-turn. So it's your, if we understand it's anyone's victory, it's the campaign's victory. It's the NEU and all the other unions. Are you there, Louise?
I'm here. It's the victory of our members. Our members have really put themselves out there, and I applaud them every single day and every single minute of every day. But also, it's the victory of all those people that supported us and backed us, because it's those people who we knew had our backs that made our members feel confident to do it. We knew that parents knew we were doing the right things. We knew that communities knew we were doing the right things. We knew that people like Claudia, Rebecca and Zara would back us and would stand with us when we needed them to. And that is what makes a good socialist society, is having people you know have got your back. So we are in this for our children and young people. I want our schools open. Our members want our schools open. We know the best place for children and young people is to be in school with their education workers. But at the moment, we have to protect our communities. And that's why we've done what we've done. We've done it to protect our communities, to protect our NHS, and to stand in solidarity with all those people that are feeling really anxious about this situation. And we will continue to do that. We will continue to stand against this government, to stand up for what is right, to stand up for safety and security, and to fight for the things that we need. But I think people have raised some really important questions. There is a massive disparity in our country, and that is something we have to fight for coming out of this. You know, we have far too many children living in poverty. We have far too many children who don't have access to the things that they need. But what I can tell you for sure, Crispin, is our members will be doing their very, very best to make sure children get what they can get in terms of the best we can possibly deliver to them during this coming few weeks. And we will continue to do that, but we will continue to make sure our schools and our communities are safe.
Well, thank you very much for staying all the way, and thank you to everyone who's contributed. Now we've got through the business of the show, we can have a little chat, relax a bit.
That was such an inspiring show.
Well, it shows that we can win if we actually get together and do a Zoom with 200,000 people. I mean, that takes a lot of mobilizing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe this pandemic's given us a new tool that we can use more effectively than we had before. I don't think you'd have got that many on a Zoom if we didn't have the pandemic. So it's quite good.
Yeah, and like you say, someone's saying it's the biggest trade union meeting ever. You couldn't cram them into a hall, could you?
Yeah, and it did enough to scare the government. So you know, that's how it goes. So have you been? You haven't written another song, have you?
I have indeed. Yes.
A New Year song.
I wrote it this morning because I was thinking about the subject, and yeah. So shall I?
Yeah.
Here you go. It starts a bit anecdotal, but yeah. Anyway, here you go. Well, I first joined a union when I was 17, part-time at the co-op selling carpets. Jack the rep said it's a good idea, the USDAW, and later I went full-time cleaning toilets. People say, does it do any good? Should I join a union? Well, then I trained to be a teacher, and my father said to me, you want to join a proper union, son, join the NUT. When we went to my first meeting at Smallbury Green School Hall, my dad pointed out the rank and file. I thought, cool, they look cool. People say, does it do any good? Should I join a union? Well, I had enough of Kinnock and I couldn't stomach Blair, but I never left the union because all my mates were there. And yeah, I had some issues with the Stalinist bureaucrats, but we defended Hounslow's nurseries and we once boycotted Saks. People say, does it do any good? Should I join a union? Well, and now it's 2021 and we're called the NEU. It's the worst of times to have the very worst of governments too. And where's the opposition to these murderous bungling fools who insist, despite the evidence, we have to open schools? And the bodger says on Sunday, well, your kids will be all right. But teachers don't go back on Monday. And guess what? On Monday night, Bodger does a U-turn, closes schools as well as zoos. So we can't all play like Marcus Rashford for Man U, but we can all join a union. Yeah, we can all join a union. Yeah, we can all join a union. We can all join a union. People say, does it do any good? Should I join a union? Of course you fucking should. We can all join a union. We can all join a union. We can all join a union. Yeah, we should all join a